Good morning. Welcome to the Symposium. I'm Chris Berry. I'm the director of the Mansueto Institute. I'm a professor at the Harris School of Public Policy as well. The Mansueto Institute is the proud home of the Kreisman Initiative on Housing, Law, and Policy, which is our convener today. The Mansueto Institute is a research center that brings together scholars from many disciplines who are dedicated to the question of what makes cities successful. One of the ways we do this is through events like this one, where we've brought together people from many different disciplines and many different sectors of society, government, private sector, nonprofits, academics as well. And so we're looking forward to a really exciting day of conversation and collaborations. A little bit more about the Kreisman Initiative. So the Kreisman Initiative, with respect to housing, really embodies the Mansueto Institute's goals of bringing together people from across campus and across sectors of society to talk about important issues facing cities, in this case, housing. The initiative was founded by David and Susan Kreisman and is the only effort of its kind at the university that's specifically dedicated to housing. David, who is here today, is a graduate of the law school and a real estate attorney. And he had the foresight to recognize housing as a major societal issue that the University of Chicago could more deeply engage with and contribute to, given the resources we have here scattered around the university. David's son, Dan Kreisman, is also here, and he's been integral to developing the Kreisman Initiative, and both have been great partners to us. I can't resist mentioning that Dan is also a graduate of the Harris School, where I had the opportunity to teach him. And in spite of that fact, he's gone on to a very successful career in academia and is now a professor of economics himself at Georgia State. And we deeply appreciate the contributions and friendship of the Kreismans. Now, a little bit more about the initiative. What do we do that's not this event? Well, one of the things we do is a fellowship program for graduate students. They come from all over the university: Harris, Law School, Booth, Social Sciences, Crown. And through this fellowship, they get the opportunity to do research on housing as well as an internship. And I would say many of those students are here now. All of them will be here at some point in the day. And so I really encourage all the rest of you to find a chance to interact with these interesting young fellows that we have, particularly those of you who may be hiring new positions in the field. Here's your chance to find some great candidates who will be here throughout the day. The Kreisman Initiative also funds faculty research on housing, and starting next year, we will be hosting visiting faculty and postdocs, so a lot of exciting things to come with the Kreisman Initiative. As for today's convening, I'm really pleased that we're here today to talk about the intersection of two crises facing society now. The first is the crisis of housing, and specifically affordable housing. And the second, of course, is the climate crisis. And we have many people who are working on one or the other of these crises, both at the university and, of course, elsewhere in the world. But this is one of the few events I'm aware of that's bringing people together to talk about their intersection, and hopefully not just the intersection of the problems, but also the intersection of the solutions, because they are connected. Climate-related migration, rising insurance costs, the housing sector's contributions to climate emissions, they'll affect all of us, and in particular, they'll affect communities of color. While cities and nations are beginning to address these crises, I think given the trajectories we're on with respect to both, it's fair to say they are likely to get worse before they get better. And so that's why we need all of you who are here today. It's really important that we have a platform for everyone to participate, and so I want to point out that there's going to be question and answer sessions after every panel and after every individual keynote. We also have QR codes on all the tables that give you an opportunity to link to a survey where you can tell us more as well about your ideas and interests. And we'd love to see you at future events, both future events sponsored by the Kreisman Initiative and the Mansueto Institute. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Emily Talen, professor of urbanism in the Division of Social Sciences at the university, faculty director of the Kreisman Initiative. Emily's research is dedicated to urban design, and she is well known for her commitment to investigating the relationship between the built environment and social equity. Emily received a Guggenheim Fellowship and is the author of many influential books, including Neighborhood and New Urbanism and American Planning, The Conflict of Cultures. Emily's expertise makes her the ideal faculty director for the Kreisman program and the ideal host for today's events. Emily, I hand it over to you. Welcome.
Chris, thank you so much for that. And I want to start by giving a shout out to the amazing Mansueto staff, and that is Brian Wilson, Amy Giles, Elaine Meyer, and Heidi Lee. Can we give them a round of applause? They make this event come together. What's amazing to me about this event is what we did is we literally just looked around the US, the world in fact, and said, who is the very best person, who are the very best people to talk about the intersection between housing and climate change? And we picked them out, and lo and behold, they are all here today. Folks, this is the A team that we have here today. And all of these folks are just passionate and serious about this topic. And, you know, we're going to need the A team to help us navigate through these very complex ways that housing and sustainability come together, housing and climate change. On the one hand, what's very paradoxical is on the one hand, housing is a significant driver, literally, of climate change, often because of sprawl, and because of the energy inefficiencies involved in housing, and you're going to be hearing about that today. But on the other hand, of course, housing is on the front lines of climate change impacts, floods, heat waves. Those affect people where they live. And it's, as Chris mentioned, disproportionately impacting people of lower advantage. And so the other thing that actually Chris Wheat was pointing out to me the other day, who is our closer, is the ways in which what housers want, housing advocates, affordable housing advocates, what they want in terms of policy, that doesn't always align well with what advocates of climate change mitigation are after. And so it's these kinds of tensions and paradoxes and possible synergies that we're going to find that will be what we'll be discussing today. Now, I'm not going to talk too much more because you're going to hear all about this today through the course of the day. We're going to kick off with a video that was made by Daniel Kind. One thing we have here at the University of Chicago is amazing undergraduate students. And Daniel, a budding videographer, he had the idea of putting together a video on this topic. And he's perfect for this because he's from Florida. So Florida is one of those places that is sprawling out and building in a really inefficient, climate change contributing kind of way. And it's also a place that's at the front line of the effects of climate change. I think he had in mind a 2-hour feature film. I made him cut it down to 3 minutes. But he was able to do that. So without further ado, can we please kick off that video?
We are experiencing the extreme droughts, the extreme atmospheric rivers, the extreme heat.
And directly contributing to that is, of course, climate change. So as the temperatures rise, polar ice caps melt, and slowly the water level rises throughout the globe.
So the current state of housing, I hate to call it terrible, but for most of the world it is terrible. Flood areas in low-lying places like Bangladesh or the Niger Delta.
New York, Miami, Mumbai.
You think that affordable housing is a crisis now. Imagine when Prices have just gone up, supply has stayed stable, and we've got people now moving around the globe impacting some of the already most impacted places on the planet.
Urban heat islands affect human health, and it affects energy consumption. Those two things alone are enough to drive worldwide interest.
We know we need to continue raising resilience up the agenda so it's the equal sibling with mitigation. We know that it's more important for many communities than mitigation. Resilient solutions in the most vulnerable communities where the climate crisis is a felt reality today, not an abstract idea tomorrow.
Officials from Rio de Janeiro and New York City using satellite data to prepare for the effects of climate change. In New York, city officials take these projections into account while rebuilding from major storms like Hurricane Sandy and anticipating future coastal flooding.
But 20% of our carbon emissions in the United States come from the way that we are heating, cooling, and powering our homes. And so it makes our homes the world's 6th largest emitter of carbon emissions.
Daniel Kind, everyone. Okay, next up, I'm going to introduce Doug Farr. Where are you? There you are. Doug Farr is going to introduce our first keynote speaker, but also Doug Farr is going to say a few words about his efforts locally to create this amazing thing, the Climate Action Museum. Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Emily. Good morning, everyone. How we doing? I'm going to be brief about the Climate Action Museum because I'm the thing that stands between us and hearing from our friend, our esteemed friend, Dana Bourland. So behind me is an image of the Climate Action Museum. Have people heard of the Climate Action Museum? Have people been to the Climate Action Museum? A few of you. Well, welcome aboard. So it exists. It's a real thing. We opened last June at 300 South Riverside Plaza downtown in free office space. Stephen Vance was one of the co-founders along with several dozen other people. It is the world's 8th climate museum. It is open to the public Monday through Friday, 10 to 6, and Saturdays, 10 to 2. So come on down, get on the website. You can sign up for a guided tour if you'd like. And Emily, is it true I have slides to advance? Where'd you go? Oh, yeah, okay. Okay. There we go. Here's the look of it on the outside. So the point today is we invite you to come. I think today's symposium may have started with a kind of a challenge or something. Like my awareness of it started with a conversation about the exhibit at the Climate Action Museum, where we have full-scale mock-ups to demonstrate how housing can evolve from burning fossil fuels to not, what we call decarbonizing housing. And so come on down, it's a real bricks and mortar experience. And let's see, the last image here is really looking at the whole world, kind of everything around us, particularly the built environment, through a climate lens. And so how that changes your perceptions, housing is a big part of it, leave it at that. So anyway, enough of that Climate Action Museum, come visit. The star of the show this morning is Dana Bourland, a friend of many of us in this room. Dana Bourland, I'm going to read. Dana Bourland is a green affordable housing expert, was most recently vice president for the environment at the JPG Foundation, where she led the creation of the environment program at one of the largest private foundations in the US. Previously, Dana was vice president of the Green Initiatives for Enterprise Community Partners, where we met 20 years ago, a not-for-profit dedicated to making well-designed homes affordable. She developed and oversaw all aspects of Enterprise Green Communities program, including the creation of the Green Communities Criteria and Enterprise's multifamily retrofit program. Dana is the author of Gray to Green Communities, a call to action on the housing and climate crises, in which she argues that we need to move away from a gray housing model to a green model, which considers the health and well-being of residents, their communities, and the planet. In her book, she suggests that we can, over the next decade, deliver housing as a human right while lowering carbon emissions. Dana, come on up.
Good morning. It's so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And Daniel, thank you for including me in the video. It's great. This really is a full circle moment for me. And I was just sitting there furiously sort of even correcting that statement. A bunch of concentric circles. I was born here. I was born while my father was going to seminary not too far from here. I sort of got to understand what housing really means in terms of how it's delivered and the system and policies and programs, but how housing works on the ground in our history of racialized housing practices, current day racialized practices. When I was an intern at the Oak Park Housing Center, when I was in college at Kalamazoo College. And then as Doug said, this is the first place I came when I was at Enterprise trying to learn about the connection between green building, that was a burgeoning movement at the time, and how to do that in a way that would really benefit the people who needed it the most, who would really benefit from the green building approaches that would make housing healthier and address the issues of our economy and the environment altogether. And so Chicago was the place I came to sit down with Doug, who had been the architect on some of the leading green affordable housing developments at the time. I met Scott Bernstein at the Center for Neighborhood Technology. I met Ann Evans, who continues to just be such a great friend and colleague and expert, who should be up here as well, concluding us in the future of where this movement is going. And so it's terrific to be here. And I guess I should find the clicker and get on with the show. But I felt like I would be remiss without sharing that with you, that Chicago has a special place in my heart, and that everything I'm going to talk about today, it's not experimental. Like I said, I was here 20 years ago learning about this stuff. We can do it. We can address our housing and climate crises in one fell swoop. It is not terribly innovative, and it's definitely not experimental, and it does not have to cost more. It is just simply a different way of thinking. So I did bring a few copies of Gray to Green. It's in the entry there. It's on the honor system. Take it. If you find me on Venmo and want to make a contribution, feel free. But really, I just want to get the book in the hands of those who are starting this journey or looking to learn more about it. So what I want to do this morning is just to ground us in what I wrote about in Gray to Green Communities, to define what I mean by those terms, and to offer a way of thinking about how to get there. And I'll conclude, though, with a few remarks about how I'm thinking about this today, how my thinking has evolved. So this book is about making quantum leaps in equitably addressing the dual crises of climate change and housing affordability in one fell swoop by going gray to green. Look, we all know it, but it's definitely worth repeating, especially at the beginning of a symposium like this, that we are at an extraordinary point in human history. The people who have had the least to do with creating the housing and the climate crises are facing the impacts of both on a daily basis. And it's traumatic because you just don't know when, from day to day, that rug is going to get pulled out from under your feet. The problem is that the way we are producing and preserving housing in this country is not meeting demand, and it's at odds with our collective need to take action to curb carbon emissions and avoid catastrophic planetary collapse. And I used to be embarrassed about saying that. Are we really approaching catastrophic? Yes, we are. We are at that point in time. We are running out of time. It is getting catastrophic. 20% of carbon emissions in the US stem from heating, cooling, and powering our homes, making our homes, as you heard in the video, the world's 6th largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, comparable to countries like Brazil, and even more than countries like Germany. Just think about that for a moment. It's our housing, it's our home. And even if the entire electrical grid was decarbonized, it would be insufficient to reducing carbon emissions to a level that would avoid even more severe impacts than what we are experiencing now. Intense heat, longer allergy seasons, rising sea levels, and droughts, because half of all the housing in this country is at least 40 years old or older, and everyone living in those homes will continue to inefficiently use fossil fuels unless we intervene. And not only does inaction have a price in terms of the cost of disasters, but it traps people in inadequate homes, paying higher utility bills. And when I say people, let me be very clear that these are people who are already paying more than 50% of their income for their rent or their mortgage, let alone a vacation or having fun with their family. They're choosing between food or fuel, paying their mortgage, or paying their rent. And for renters with extremely low incomes, there's a national shortage of nearly 7 million affordable rental homes, and that number is growing by the day. And according to the Federal Reserve, home ownership is the least affordable it's been since the Great Recession. And because of our racialized land use policies and practices and our history of racist housing practices, that these are majority Black, Indigenous, and persons of color living in these homes. And on any given day, any given night, there are over 500,000 people without a home altogether, who are unhoused, weathering storms, pandemics, as we got to know intimately, and work schedules, yes, working from makeshift dwellings, not because they're bad people, but because our systems have failed. We have failed. Just thinking about this, if you can't tell, makes me feel really frustrated, concerning. I'm worried. And I'm angry because we know how to solve these problems and we are choosing not to do so. I've been working on this now for over 2 decades, and these problems persist. We are running out of time. In 2022, more than 3.4 million Americans were forced to evacuate from their homes due to a disaster. 16% of displaced adults never returned to their home. What's ultimately at stake here is our collective human and planetary health and well-being, nothing less. So here's how we can make that quantum leap together in addressing these issues. It's a roadmap. It's the Green Communities criteria, and it requires using them for every housing and construction type, every time. The promise of green is abundant. We don't have the time or the resources to meet our housing crisis without considering how to meet our climate crisis, and we have the evidence that we can do both at the same time. Think of it this way. Gray housing connotes those practices that benefit a few in the short term, but negatively impact the majority of us and the planet. Whereas green housing connotes practices that benefit all of us while supporting the health of the planet now and for the long term. An example of how green housing is better and more affordable than gray housing is illustrated by Tracy, who was a nursing student when I met her almost 20 years ago now, who had just moved into Guadalupe Saldana development in Austin, Texas. Tracy didn't know it was green housing that she was moving into. She just knew that she could afford it. Her utility bills were less than half of what they had been in her previous gray apartment because it was energy efficient and there were solar panels, solar water heating panels to keep the electricity bills low. And then after moving in, she started experiencing these other co-benefits, including that her son was sleeping through the night because his asthma was not getting triggered in the home because the home contained healthy materials and it had the right type of mechanical ventilation and air circulation. And you might be thinking that this remarkable health outcome is my main point, but it's not. The main point is that her home was affordable. That is why Tracy moved there. She then realized the health benefit and the additional affordability that comes from low utility bills. Most people are looking for housing they can afford, and it shouldn't be up to the luck of the draw for who gets to benefit from it. What I also love, and this happens time after time when developers transition to green, is that the neighborhood is improved. What had been in the Saldana neighborhood just a dumping ground, refrigerators, old stoves, big appliances like that, it was now a community land trust. So these homes would always be affordable. And that former dump is now a natural green space that the whole community gets to enjoy, not just the residents of the nearby housing, but the entire community. That former dump is now a biofiltration pond, and this example illustrates that when we meet our housing need with green housing, we achieve a double bottom line through the co-benefits of improved health for people and the planet. And I use this example because we often think of green affordable housing as an output, a better product, but that's not it at all. It is simply a better process, an integrative and holistic one that extracts less harm and delivers more benefits across the entire process, from energy production to housing manufacturing, to transportation materials to the job site, to where those materials end up, and ultimately how the whole process can improve people's lives and the communities and planet we share. Green affordable housing is also a climate solution. There are many examples of how our transition from gray to green communities addresses the climate crisis. But perhaps the most talked about example is that by meeting the green communities criteria, we know the housing is more energy efficient and leading to reduced carbon emissions. I know this because when I was at Enterprise, I was part of a team that created the Green Communities Offset Fund, and we literally followed what is known as the gold standard used around the world to measure and verify additional carbon emission reductions. We bought and sold carbon offsets with developments that met the Green Communities criteria, meaning that housing that met the Green Communities criteria reduced emissions beyond business as usual. But also, green communities are smartly located, which results in a reduction of emissions associated with vehicle trips. And I remember, Doug, you evaluated the criteria. Where'd you go? Back in the day, evaluated the criteria at the request of the National Resource Defense Council to make sure that indeed the green communities criteria did lead to smartly located housing as well as greener energy efficient housing. And the green communities criteria call for using building materials that do not contain the toxic byproducts and feedstocks of the fossil fuel industry. This, I believe, is the most under-discussed and under-acknowledged part of the climate conversation. Our production of petrochemicals that get put into the building materials like adhesives and carpets, cabinets, and insulation are not only causing climate change, but the pollution from that manufacturing process doesn't just go directly up into the atmosphere. It goes into our communities, it goes into our bodies, it goes into children's bodies, and across into the soils, into the water that we depend on. And we all now know the term embodied carbon. Embodied carbon represents carbon emissions associated with making building products and construction, from raw material extraction to manufacturing, transportation, and the end-of-life disposal or recycling. When I first heard the term, I thought it was a good thing. I used to think storing coal ash in our insulation was a great thing. How elegant. I thought embodied carbon was like a snow globe. But if it's embodied, I thought, it can't pollute. But that's absolutely not the truth. Obviously, it's a very, very big problem because it represents a significant amount of annual global carbon emissions. And yet there's incredible opportunity for embodied carbon reduction simply through material selection and specification and through design. It just takes a new way of thinking about it, an integrative design approach to simply make better and different choices. If we don't, embodied carbon will be responsible for almost half of total new construction emissions between now and 2050. Plastic materials, and this is a slide I got last night. I couldn't resist putting it in here, from Gina Signatic at Habitable, formerly the Healthy Building Network. But plastic materials tend to be the worst in class from a material health perspective. The good news is that there are many non-plastic alternatives that architects, contractors, and developers can select. Do we have architects in the room? Yes, all right, I'm talking to you. The other good news is that most of these non-plastic materials are similar in cost, and oftentimes they're less expensive than the plastic alternatives. One example of plastic use in the built environment is carpet, which is mostly plastic, nylon, PVC. In commercial applications, most carpet is fully replaced every 3 years. The carpet industry in the US reports that about 2 million tons of carpet is disposed of every year, which translates to about 1.2 million tons of plastic, about the same volume as all the plastic straws, all the plastic bags, and all those plastic water bottles disposed of in the US each year combined. Carpet has one of the strongest recycling programs in the industry, yet only 0.5% of discarded carpet is recycled into new carpet. The rest is landfilled, and we know where those landfills are, don't we? We know which communities are having landfills expanded and brought closer and closer to schools and affordable housing. Carpet is just one building product. Plastic foam insulation, plastic pipes, plastic flooring is used on a similar scale, and the list goes on. Even our paint is made of plastic. These are high-volume plastic products and have viable non-petrochemical alternatives. That means that we can avoid these plastics from ever being used in the first place. Who here heard about the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, a year ago? What was it containing? What did it contain? Vinyl chloride, a product that is used in PVC resin. We are perpetuating an industry that is lethal. The building industry is the second largest user of plastic behind packaging. And while all eyes are on reducing single-use plastic packaging, plastic use in buildings is growing. So much so that plastic production continues to grow rapidly and is now the new driver of fossil fuel demand. Here's another resource if you want to learn more about alternatives to plastic products. This is the Regenerative Materials Movement. You can find it at the International Living Futures Institute. So this framework, this Green Communities framework, already exists for doing everything I just talked about. And it has evolved. Let me go back. Sometimes I skip over this, because I assume everybody understands that the criteria is a holistic approach. It addresses all of this. It's a framework and a guidebook, a blueprint to walk you through integrated design, location and neighborhood fabric details, how to make positive site improvements, water conservation, addressing the operating energy, materials, the healthy living environment, operations, maintenance, and resident engagement. The Green Communities criteria requires you to think about all of these things at one time. And it's a process. It can be done on any housing type. When I came 20 years ago, I remember touring an old historic property not far from downtown. And it met the Green Communities criteria. Single-family homes can meet the Green Communities criteria. High-rise buildings can. Old buildings, new buildings, take your pick. If you think about the Green Communities criteria as a process and address it from the get-go, from pre-build through construction, post-build, and its ongoing impact, then you can address our housing and our climate crises in this one fell swoop. The criteria has evolved since I started working on it 20 years ago, that's for sure. It's every 5 years or less, it's updated. It's currently going through an update right now. But it's evidence-based. These are proven methods and materials that do not cost more. It's been tried, it's been tested. There are 130,000 homes now that meet the Green Communities criteria. That's impacting over 1 million people. And it's endorsed by important stakeholders at housing finance agencies and even places like Fannie Mae, who have used it in their retrofit lending program, making them have one of the largest green lending programs in the country. So let me start concluding by saying that all of this work really, it's personal. And maybe you can relate to how I used to feel, which was really uncertain about whether green could indeed be affordable. Would we be providing less housing if we called for green building? And I know that the answer is categorically no. We can do both at the same time. In 2004, when I was part of the team creating the very first version of the criteria, I remember being told, keep it to a checklist. Just pick 5 things. What are 5 things people should be doing? But what I learned talking to developers already delivering green housing and architects that I met, like Doug and others, that green was possible and it was healthier and it was better for people and the planet. But even after having a big event in Houston over 10 years ago, where we gathered several hundred people to see what it would take to make all housing green, I recall the tremendous pressure from the public to instead to move on, get back to the business of simply keeping first costs low and total cost per square foot as low as possible. After all, people just need a roof over their head. But I am not uncertain anymore. I know this is the right approach because we have more evidence and we have more technical know-how, thanks to groups like Elevate and others. And it is why I decided to finish writing the book that took me almost 10 years. I started it in 2012. It has become imperative that we make a transition from gray to green. We must stop locking people into inadequate and obsolete housing that extracts from our collective well-being, because we all benefit from cleaner air, from cleaner water, cleaner soil, and a society where we all have a place to live that we can afford, regardless of our zip code, of our race, or our income. Because when we pollute to make our cheap materials and our dirty energy, that pollution affects all of us now and for generations to come. So I am not uncertain, but it's not about me. It's about what we can all do together. So let's use our tools, our power, our influence to make it happen. It is within our grasp to do so. But wait, there's more. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and so bear with me because I haven't spoken a lot about this next part of what it means to truly transition to green communities. But let me start by quoting a good friend of mine, Michael McAfee, the president and CEO of PolicyLink, who said, "Don't let the urgency of the moment make us solve the wrong problem." Housing doesn't just magically exist on its own, floating on top of land. No, it's constructed. There's foundations laid. There's an interaction between the planet and the building. And we often don't give it much thought. We don't give it much thought about the land, the condition it's in, the condition it was in, who was there before, whose land is this? We just build without any acknowledgement for the land on which we are building. And I'm not talking simply about Googling your zip code to find out which tribe or indigenous community it was stolen from, because I was reminded last week that each time we acknowledge what unceded land we are working from without doing anything about returning it, then we are perpetuating the harm, the trauma that every Native American person holds today. No, it's about a more balanced way of living on the land. I'm sure everyone has a memory of playing outside, playing with nature, experiencing its joy, its healing, its awe. I've moved a lot. If you read my book, you know I've moved many times before I was even 17, and every time I would seek out the trees, the river, the park, because it reminds us that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. It's how a lot of us got through COVID. So yes, the impact of housing and the climate crises are greatly inequitable. Housing is the physical demonstration of racist systems embedded in our country. When the Federal Housing Authority guaranteed bank loans to developers, restricting them to building housing for only white households and requiring deeds to those homes that prevented their being resold to African Americans, it kickstarted the acceleration of today's racialized wealth gap. And along with denying African Americans access to the legal system when they were finally granted freedom to purchase land, creating the legacy of what we know today is called heirs property, which the USDA has recognized as the leading cause of Black involuntary land loss. And this is Mossville, Louisiana. I'm not sure if anyone's been there. That middle is Stacey Ryan's home. Mossville was a community that was founded by freed slaves. Stacey's ancestors acquired the land, created a community that was safe for them and their children. And this was his holding out. I urge you to find Mossville on PBS or Google it. There's documentaries about this community that is emblematic of many that have been sacrificed for those plastic materials I was talking about. So yes, the impact of the housing and climate crisis is greatly inequitable. I'm not sure if you can tell, but this is a picture of an oil pipe. It's running through our Great Lakes, and it's running across the Bad River Band's territory. It was made to be 50 years old. It's now 70 years old. Any day now, it could leak. It already has here and there. We depend on the Great Lakes for our fresh water in the United States. The world depends on our Great Lakes for fresh water. Our policies, our practices, and programs that extract wealth, knowledge, and life for the profit and gain of a few is the same thinking that has brought us to the brink of destroying our planet. The impact of the housing and climate crisis is greatly inequitable. This is Gaston County, North Carolina, beautiful mountain country. But it is beginning to look like the mountains of Appalachia, where we have removed the tops of mountains to frack. These forests are our lungs. We depend on them. All this decarbonizing work is for nothing if we don't fundamentally repair our relationship to the land and the planet on which we depend. There's certainly a camp of people, I've heard them say it, they throw up their hands and they say, oh well, humans will just destroy themselves, the planet will be okay. But this is just another one of those many false solutions. It's a false choice between human existence and planetary existence. We can, and I would say, must coexist in a mutually beneficial way. We can be helpful to the planet just as it can be helpful to us. We have so much to learn from it. I dare you to go to a site called asknature.org and play with it. Ask nature how to solve some of your problems. I'm a potter. I dig in the soil for fun. And I'm exploring this now, and I don't really have the words yet to talk about it publicly, but I'm doing it today, just like I did 20 years ago when I felt nervous talking about the housing and climate crisis. I feel incredibly hopeful by the land reunion efforts happening across the country, many stemming from the realization that humans, that we, have caused such horrific damage to the earth. That we now value the minerals, the commodities, and the byproducts of our planet more than we value the planet itself. We have been willing to sacrifice it for our own short-term profit. Not even everybody's profit, just a few. What we don't fully realize yet is that we are sacrificing ourselves. Places like Mossville might feel far away, but they're getting closer and closer to where we all live. Plastics are in our blood. In New York City, we had days where we had to stay inside. We couldn't breathe. I couldn't actually see. My eyes stung because of the wildfires in Canada. My book starts with a story about a land trust in Albuquerque, a community that allowed unsustainable uses of forests and water, but where the community took matters into their own hands to reunite with the land and have a part in its healing, while still providing housing for those who needed it the most, green, affordable housing. We must become stewards of the planet. And this is the message I want to leave you with. That we must become stewards of the planet and not thieves and destructive forces. What would it look like if we stopped sacrificing communities and the planet being the largest community of them all, and instead let us justly and equitably move to enabling green communities for all? And so I'll close in the words of Congressman John Lewis. This is our planet. We all must learn to live together. If not, we will perish as fools. I'm going to say that again because I butchered it. This is our planet. We must all learn to live together. If not, we will perish as fools. We know how. Let's do better together. Thank you.